The Chiefs came out on top over Tampa by the score of 41-31. The Chiefs' offense was just humming on all cylinders in this game. Patrick Mahomes looked like he was in midseason form. He was absolutely dicing up that Tampa secondary and really Tampa's defense to a whole. And it was quite surprising because when Kevin and I were going over this game last week, we were of the mindset that both Tampa and Kansas City would be able to put up points against each respective defense, but we still favored KC in this one simply just because of the inconsistencies that Tampa's offense has. And even though that the Bucs did score 31 points on the offensive side of the board, you could still tell that there are some lingering issues with that Bucs offense that are going to be have to be remedied going throughout the rest of the regular season. But when it comes to the Chiefs, I think a lot of the doom and gloom predictors when it came to the Chiefs' upcoming season, I think they are largely overblown at this point in time. Granted, we're only 4 weeks in, it's the first month of the season, so there's still a lot of time left to go when it comes to the Chiefs and how their season's going to play out. But even though that they lost some key pieces like Tyreek Hill, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, I don't think they've really missed a beat here. When you look through their first 4 games, granted they did drop one to the Colts last week, which was quite a surprise. They were held to 17 points on the road against Indy. They bounced back in a major way, putting up 41 points and really looked like one of the best offenses in the league, despite the turnover that they've had with their weapons. And it really is just kind of a point of emphasis that I have to keep focusing on here. As long as you got Patrick Mahomes, the magic can continue. Granted, it may come out a different way compared to what the Chiefs had with Tyreek Hill and Marcus Valdez-Scantling, but the fact that Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, and Patrick Mahomes have been able to essentially get this offense to consistently putting up at least 25 to 30 points a game in the first month of the year, it is quite astounding. Just because there were a lot of people that were potentially saying that the Chiefs were going to take a major step back just based off of the fact of losing some key targets in Patrick Mahomes' arsenal. But I don't really see any issues going here. When I look at Patrick, he's been extremely effective. Typically, when we look at Patrick, Patrick does a really good job in the month of September, and really this past September was no exception. Even though this game took place in October, he was still able to keep the consistency going from September going into this game and pretty much torched one of the best defenses that we've seen so far this year. Tampa's defense had been stout the first 3 weeks, and they came back down to earth in a major way. And that was simply just because of what Patrick was able to do. And not only that, I thought the Chiefs had a great ground attack throughout the entire course of the game. And Tampa is really known for a pretty stout run defense. But I have to say, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the rest of that Chiefs running back core, they were solid from beginning to end. They were getting multiple carries where it looked like Tampa was going to get a stop, maybe 1 to 2 yards past the line of scrimmage. But you got to give credit to the Chiefs running backs to be able to find some space to get an extra, 3, 4, 5 yards. And it really helps that Chiefs offense because instead of a 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 7 or a 2nd and 9, you're dealing with a 2nd and 2 or a 2nd and 3. You have a lot more flexibility in that offense to be able to stretch the field, to be able to extend drives. And essentially, that's what we saw for the Chiefs on the road against Tampa. So by and large, when it comes to the Chiefs, I think the Chiefs are fine. They're sitting at the top of the AFC West. And despite the fact that some teams in the AFC West have really taken a tremendous stride to bolster their position in that division, the Chiefs find themselves at the top of the pecking order in the AFC West going into October. And I think for me personally, I don't really see any sort of issue with them moving forward. Really, the only thing that I can point to is if their offense isn't necessarily humming at all cylinders, that defense can be a little bit shaky. We have seen at times where their defense can step up when the offense is, I would say, inconsistent at best. But I would say that the only way that the Chiefs are going to be able to sustain the success moving forward is that offense is going to have to score 25 to 30 points just because that defense is still leaky at times and may not necessarily be the most reliable when that offense isn't running at all cylinders. Now let's kick it to Tampa. When it comes to Tampa, there's something of note that I have to bring up here. Tom Brady, I think, is playing fine so far. And granted, the defense had a letdown game against the Chiefs. That happens. I mean, when you're going up against Patrick Mahomes, I'm not saying that it's expected. Obviously, you try to do everything to avert that, but it was safe to say that the Chiefs had their number the entire night, and there was really no sort of answer that Tampa's defense had for KC. Now, when it comes to Brady, you could tell, is frustrated with the lack of consistency that this offense has had. They had their best offensive output of the season so far. They put up 31 points. Now, granted, it was in a losing effort. There were some steps that they took forward from this game, but by and large, a lot of these points that Tampa were able to get, they were in a position where they were already down 3 possessions. And it didn't seem like that offense was consistent. And it really comes down to not Tom Brady, but their offensive line. And I'm looking at their left guard. Their left guard is just weak. And I'm not saying weak physically. He's not weak in that regard. But when it comes to his competence at playing that left guard position, it's just not there. He's getting bull rushed left and right. And Chris Jones largely had his way against him. And until the Bucs can really shore up this part of their offensive line, they're going to struggle offensively. And not just it doesn't have an effect on Brady alone. It has an effect on Leonard Fournette, on their run game. And by and large, it just puts their offense in a tricky situation. It kind of binds them up, and it kind of makes them essentially one-dimensional. Because when we look back to this game against the Chiefs, Brady threw the ball 52 times in this game. And there was a stretch where Brady threw the ball 25 times in a row because they couldn't rely on the offensive line to be able to open up run lanes for Leonard Fournette and the rest of Tampa's running back core. It also didn't help that Tampa largely dug themselves in a hole early in the first quarter, and it was basically catch up at that point for them. But their offensive line is a major issue moving forward. It was nice to see that Chris Godwin and Julio Jones came back from injuries in this game, but you could tell that Tom is not happy with the production that the offense is putting out on the field. Granted, it could be worse. They're at a 2-2 record. They could be sitting at a situation where they're under 500 or they're winless, but that's not necessarily the case here. But they definitely need to fix some things going forward, just because when I look at Tom, I think Tom has been largely fine. He's protecting the ball well. He's completing at least 60 to 65% of his passes a game. He's putting up touchdowns left and right. It's just a lot of drives end up getting stalled, and they have to be able to punt. They got to put the defense in a tricky situation just because of the inconsistency at times on the offensive side of the ball. And until this offensive line issue is resolved, I think Tom's going to be, I'm not going to say disinterested with the lack of scoring that the Bucs are putting on the board. It's just that offensive line is going to be a huge, major emphasis here for him going forward. And until that gets resolved, I think Tampa is going to have kind of a bumpy road for the next couple of weeks. It could help if they get Ryan Jensen back, but there's no guarantee that his presence alone is going to fix the issues on the offensive line. But if they have the struggles, it's probably best to have them right now in the month of September, early October. You can be able to learn from those mistakes, and you can be able to bounce back from them fairly quickly. But by the time that November rolls around and December comes, they better have these issues resolved, or else it's going to kind of be an up and down year for them. And that's despite the fact that you have the GOAT at the quarterback spot.